Hi, fifth graders. Welcome back to our fictional narrative writing project. This is session 2, and today we are going to be talking about what are the expectations and what are we doing for the introduction, okay? So we'll see some examples, and we're also going to go over the rubric. So an author's purpose, especially when writing a fictional narrative, is to entertain our audience. So that is what our goal is going to be throughout this project. So as I said, session 2, we're going over the rubric and the introduction. So first, let's talk about the purpose. The purpose is to tell readers a made-up story. A fictional narrative, it could be funny, it could be action-packed, it could be inspirational. The purpose is to entertain your reader. So some of the features of a fictional narrative are that, first of all, it's fiction, so it's made up. And it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, we talked a little bit about this in our last session when we looked at our story mountains. So we have the introduction, we have the build-up, we have our main event or our climax of our story, which would be considered the middle. Then we have our resolution and conclusion, which would be the ending, okay? So there needs to be that story arc, and we need to follow that throughout our writing process. We also said that it has to have characters, a setting, and a plot. What is happening? Who is there? Where is this happening? Now, the plot also has to have a problem that is solved at the end to keep the reader interested. It could be a mystery, it could be something that is going wrong, it could be a lesson that is learned, but you also need to include dialogue and interactions between the characters as well to keep it interesting, and that helps us to get to know the characters a little bit better as well. It also needs to use a time order sequence, and what I mean by that is use those transitional words. So really tap into that and use what you've learned from your previous papers and incorporate that into this one as well. Because in a story, we need to know what happens first, what happens next, what happens in the end. And in order for the reader to follow that along easily, those transition words help to provide a sequence of events. So keep that in mind as you're reading as well. Now, this is our fictional narrative writing rubric, okay? So it's going to be a total of 40 points, and these are some of the things that we will be looking for as we are grading, okay? So first off, I would like to point out that you need to have a minimum of 5 slides, and the reason I picked 5 is because, well, we have an intro, a build-up, a main event, a resolution, and an ending. So that's 5 different paragraphs that you should have. Now, I made the maximum 10 slides because remember, this is a short story, okay? This is not a long 10-page paper that we're writing. This is a short story, but you do need to have a minimum of 5 paragraphs. However, since you have some flexibility with this project, if you would like to put each paragraph on one slide, then you would end up with those 5 slides, excluding your title slide, of course. But some of you may decide to do a comic and you won't have full paragraphs on each slide, so I gave you that range just so that you have a little bit more flexibility, okay? Now, if you take a look at the rubric, which, sorry, it got a little bit cut off. Let me see. I don't have a way to fix that. That's all right. If you take a look at the rubric, the first thing is I effectively used my story mountain to organize and plan my writing. So we will be taking a look at your story mountain. So you need to make sure that those are filled out. Now, I would like to point out that just because you fill out your story mountain a certain way doesn't mean you have to go exactly by that as you're writing. Sometimes in the creative process, you come up with things that you hadn't planned on writing about before, and it changes a little bit from your original plan, which is okay. We just want to make sure that you have a plan that is organized to start off with, okay? So these will be rated on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the most points that you can get, 1 being the least. I set the scene for the reader with an engaging introduction, and that's what you'll be working on today. I use descriptive language to describe the characters and setting in the story, so we want to use descriptive language throughout. My story has a clear introduction, build-up, dilemma, resolution, and ending. And what I mean by that is it needs to be clear what your introduction is, what your build-up is, what's your dilemma, what's your solution, what's your ending. The reason is because if we don't follow that paragraph format, it can be a little bit hard to follow along as the reader, and sometimes it can get a little bit rambly, and as writers, we tend to just want to jot down all of our thoughts all at once, and it's hard to follow along as the reader. So we want to make sure that you're really following that paragraph structure of having an introduction, a build-up, and so on, okay? So try to make sure, and remember, Mrs. Vaughn and Mrs. McCauley and Mrs. Charbonneau and now me, we are all trying to push for at least 10 to 12 sentences in your paragraphs, okay? That's a good, solid paragraph, especially when writing a narrative story. So 10 to 12 sentences should be your goal for each of those 5 paragraphs. Next up, we have transition words and phrases to organize the sequence of events. I describe the character's thoughts, feelings, actions to show the events in the story. Remember, dive deep into what the character is feeling, what the character is thinking. Remember, you're taking on a perspective of one of the characters and you're telling the story through their perspective. So give us some insights as to what they're thinking and feeling. I have included rich dialogue between the characters to further the reader's understanding. So make sure that dialogue is interactive and that it's entertaining and that it provides more to the story and helps us to understand the characters even better. My narrative is clear, organized, and contains 5 to 10 slides. Sorry, that got cut off a little bit at the bottom, but it says it contains 5 to 10 slides. So we're really looking at that minimum of 5 and a maximum of 10. If for some reason you can't get it on to those 10, try to contact your teacher and see, what their thoughts are, okay? Like I said, try to stick to those 10 to 12 sentences per each of those 5 paragraphs. So we avoid, any disorganization as we're writing, okay? Let's take a look at our next slide. So today we're looking at our intro. This is my little story mountain that I have for you here today. So we have the intro, the build-up, main event, resolution, and end. As you can see, it follows that story arc. So today you're focusing on the introduction. So the beginning of your narrative should introduce the characters, describe the setting in which the narrative takes place, begin the sequence of events, and include some interesting details. So this is where you're hooking your reader. Now I want you to go ahead and pause this video, and you are going to go back into your Google Classroom assignment and open up this video. It's called Episode 4 Introduction, How to Write an Imaginative Narrative. So as you're watching this, I want you to be thinking about what kind of introduction you would like to use in your piece, what kind of hook you would like to use. So go ahead and pause this video, watch this video, it's linked below in the assignment, and then come back to me, okay? Okay, so now that you've watched that video, how will you hook your reader's attention? So we have different types of hooks. We have a question. You could start off with a question. You could start off with some sort of action. Something's happening and you're right in the middle of it. You could start off with a flashback, looking back at something that happened within that character's perspective. So something that happened to that character and you're describing it from their perspective. You could start off with a dialogue conversation. You could start off with a description of something. Maybe it's an event. Maybe your character is doing something and you're describing it. That sort of goes along with that action. Or you could start off with a sound, just like you saw in that video, some sort of hook to get your reader intrigued. What could that sound have been? Okay? So those are different ways that you could really get your reader involved and hooked into your story and make them want to continue reading. So you need to think about which one you would like to use. So let's take a look at my example of an introduction. Now I have chosen to use the Storybook slides template, and you may use this if you would like, but you do not have to. So as you can see, I've created a title slide, and you should have a title slide as well because every story needs to have a title. So my story is called Courage to Harness, and you want your title to be related, of course, to your story. And this is by me, Ms. Renzi. So let's take a look at my intro. Now, I just would like to point out that I have not included illustrations yet, and I want you to hold off on illustrations because that will be a separate session where we will be talking about those illustrations, okay? So first, I just want you to focus on your writing. We can go back and add illustrations in a different session, okay? So for today, Courage to Harness, this is my intro, and I'm starting off with a question. Who would have thought that my worst nightmare would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me? After a 4-hour drive, my best friend Cleo and I had arrived at our new boarding school, Alvia, also known as the School for the Gifted. As I looked around me, I saw the wrought iron gate embellished with the school's emblem of a pixie engraved upon a shield. The gray stoned walls that stood over 1,000 years old bore the secrets of many before us. This is it, I thought to myself. This is where I will learn to use my gift. 3 weeks into our classes, and I still couldn't harness any of my powers. I was beyond frustrated. All the other students in our class were way ahead of me, I complained to Cleo. The gray sky made me feel even gloomier. It will come to you. Have patience. Just as Cleo was comforting me, I felt a shove in my right shoulder. Celine. All right, so if you look back at my intro, you can see that I've introduced my characters. I have my main character, which you will see her name in my build-up. And you've also seen it as Beatrix in my story mountain as well. So we have Cleo, her best friend, and they are at Elvia, the School for the Gifted. And I've described a little bit about what she's seeing, what the setting is like. I've included some dialogue. She's thinking. I've included her inner thoughts, what she's feeling and what she's thinking. Here again, I have that I was feeling gloomy. I was feeling frustrated. So I've already included some of those character traits for my main character. And as you can see from the interaction between Cleo and Beatrix, it will come to you. Have patience. Cleo was comforting me. So you can see that Cleo is a comforting friend, and it seems like she's going to be a good friend to Beatrix. So that's really important to my story as well. When you're making those character interactions, make sure they align with how you want your characters to be, what their character traits are, and how they are related to each other, okay? So I've set the scene. You can sort of get an idea of what my story is going to be about without giving too much away. So you do want to clue your reader in as to what your story is going to be about. Clearly, mine is going to be about her trying to learn to use her gifts and struggling with not being able to. But I haven't gotten to that build-up yet, okay? I've just given a little clue as to what it might be about. Now, as you notice, there may be some errors throughout my writing, punctuation, grammar, spelling, capitalization, and I'm not going to fix them just yet. If you find them in your writing, go ahead and fix them. But I know that eventually, before I turn this in or before I finish, I will be going back and editing and revising. So I'm not too worried about that right now, okay? So excuse those if you see them. All right, so your goal for today is to start off with your introduction. Leave those illustrations behind. Remember 10 to 12 sentences. I think mine is 11 right here, including the quotes, okay? So that should be a good intro, solid intro paragraph, all right? So use that story mountain to guide you, and use that video that I have attached, and let us know if you have any questions, okay?